Hello, welcome. Today I am going to be talking to you guys about retrieving clay, kneading and wedging, and storing your clay projects. Alright, so we are over here at our clay table. So this is where you're going to go whenever you need to get clay in class. You'll notice that you have two different choices of clay to choose from as far as colors go. One is our gray clay. This is what you're going to be using most often. It's also technically a white clay, we could call it, because what'll happen is, it's gonna dry, it's gonna go in the kiln, and then when it finally comes out of the kiln, it'll actually be bright white instead of dark gray. But for most of the time, we just call it gray clay. So we got gray clay. That's what you'll be using most often. We also have a red clay. So it's a lot darker in color. There's pros and cons to it. Some people love it because it really does create a beautiful color for your project when you put glazes over it. It gives your projects a really dark, earthy kind of tone. However, it can be really messy. Because of the reddish pigment in it, your hands might be not stained, but they might turn a little orange. It might take just a couple hand washings to get that color out. So we got gray clay and we got red clay. So when you actually receive your clay, you're most likely going to get it from a block. So a block is quite literally just kind of the shape of these. This is how our new clay comes. It always comes in plastic form, which means it's soft and bendable. It hasn't dried out yet, in a block. Each of these blocks, I know one's a little taller than the other, but each of them weighs 25 pounds. So when we get clay delivered, we get all these boxes of clay. Each box will have 2 blocks, so each box weighs 50 pounds. Usually we'll order around 4,000 pounds at a time, so that's a lot of clay. But each block is just 25 pounds. So how it'll work is you'll come up to the clay table, you will pick out your clay color. For today, we will do gray. Then you will open up the bag. Usually there's a zip tie on it. It's very important that you always make sure after you get your clay, you close it up. That way it doesn't dry out on us. So I've opened up the block. I'm ready to cut it now. You would think you might just kind of dig in with your hands and grab what you need. And in thought, that sounds good, but it really doesn't work out that well. What you'll want to do is you'll want to grab a special tool called a wire cutter. You'll notice it's literally just a wire with some little wooden ends. What it'll do is you'll use it to literally cut the clay off. So you might want to use the wood pieces on the end to kind of pull and cut the clay off, but what you're actually going to want to do is kind of wrap it around your fingers like this. It'll give you just kind of better tension. It'll make it easier to slice the clay off the block. So you're going to kind of figure out about how much you actually need just by visualizing it, and then you're just going to kind of slice through like so. If I get halfway through and I'm like, I think this is all I need, I can simply pull up. And then you'll notice you can very easily grab the piece of clay off. There will be some projects where we're probably going to recommend a specific weight of clay for you to use. We don't really generally say a size, because this is a 3-dimensional form. If you say a 3-inch piece of clay, that could be like a 3-inch piece of clay that's like this, or it could be a 3-inch piece of clay that's just like this. So we usually talk about weights when we refer to how much clay to get. What you can use to check how much it weighs is simply a scale. We always have a scale on our clay table. So if we say, get 2 pounds of clay or so, you can put your clay on here, see if you have 2 pounds. And if not, you can add more clay, you can take away some clay, whatever. So once you have the right amount of clay that you need, you are then going to move on to kneading and wedging. All right, so I've got my clay from the clay table. You can see the clay table's right behind me, so I'm just flipped around. I'm on the slab rolling table right now, which you will learn about in a future demo. I've got my clay that I took off of the block with my wire cutter. Now I'm going to knead and wedge it. So what does that mean and what's the purpose of it? Well, let me start with wedging. So when you wedge your clay, you're basically just kind of hitting it on the tabletop. You'll notice that when you start working with your clay, even though it's in its plastic form, where it should be soft and squishy, it starts off kind of harder and denser. Imagine clay kind of being like chewing gum, right? So right when you first start chewing gum, it's kind of hard at first, right? You get it out of the package and it's stiff. But once you start chewing it, or once you start kneading and wedging clay, it becomes softer and it becomes easier to work with. So I've just been kind of hitting it on the tabletop, partially because you saw it was kind of an awkward square kind of shape. Clay is always easier to knead and wedge once you get it into a round-ish type shape. So I'm just wedging it on the table. It's losing that square type shape. It's becoming more of kind of like a ball of mush, and it's becoming softer to work with, which is really what we want to. So now I have wedged my clay.